Mike and the miners, are they okay? Has there been a cave-in? Did the elevator get jammed?
Yes.
Have you gone down, Doug? I want you to go down personally and check the canaries. And I said, okay, okay, okay. But before I could even get down, you pop up with this blockbuster, perfectly timed new revelation, which I've always wondered, but I didn't know that anyone could find out who really owns the Fed. And
Right.
this is so timely. And I'm just going to say that, Fed Online had 10,000 followers. Fed Now, that was supposed to take over and create central bank digital currencies, that means Federal Reserve. When you say central bank, you might as well say Federal Reserve. And so right now you've discovered the blockbuster of blockbusters. You knew who from the beginning had thrown in some money to be the big money behind the Fed,
We
but
sure did.
now you got this is I think she this one lady on the internet says this is a boom. I think you got a boom here. So
Okay. Well, we'll
what?
see.
And thank heavens you came up from the mines.
Hmm. Yeah, we were needing the ownership list of the Federal Reserve for a new website we are working on, and that was not easy to find. Uh, you'd think the Federal Reserve, you should probably just go to their website and they have a list of their shareholders, right? Wrong. They don't. They have volumes of reports and verbiage and 242-page annual report, and they have all this hoopla, but you can't find a list of who owns it. And then we finally found an article in an institutional investor where a very snarky author said that a bunch of conspiracy theorists filed a FOIA. Man, these pesky individuals.
Hmm.
And the Fed had to take time from their valuable work to go out and find this list and send it to them. And so and then the writer quoted somebody from the Federal Reserve saying that they by policy do not publish their members publicly. And I thought, what? Because if you look up Securities and Exchange Commission documents, it's a whole category within an annual report for a company, any stock company that sells to the public must disclose all of their beneficial owners, and that's a defined term, beneficial owners, anybody that holds more than 5% of the stock. In this case, the Federal Reserve doesn't even have that many banks that have significant holdings. So we're talking about a list of maybe 10 banks that they, by policy, choose not to disclose to the public how much they hold. And it was pretty disgusting to see that the Federal Reserve, the group that is actually creating our currency, handling the policy on our debt, supposedly is federal, supposedly is a reserve, which it isn't either of those, and has a checkered past going all the way back to 1913 when the Warburg Bank worked to make sure that the policies that were created around the investments in this made sure that the British banks won and that it was primarily controlled by British banks. But if you look at it today, it doesn't look on the surface as if the British are involved. It's primarily American companies on paper. But I'm just going to bottom line what we discovered, Douglas, and this is not unexpected, but still shocking. That the let me just read you the top investors in the Federal Reserve today. Citibank at 42%, 42.8. JP Morgan Chase at 29, HSBC at 8, Goldman Sachs at 4, Morgan Stanley at 3.7, Bank of New York Mellon 3.5, Deutsche Bank 0.87, Mizuho Bank out of Tokyo, zero point 0.4, and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China has 0.1% ownership in the Federal Reserve. a Chinese bank.
That's more than we, the people, have.
That's right. That's true. Now that's the top 10, and the other category is 9%. So what we're seeing here is that Citibank, J.P. Morgan, and HSBC and Goldman Sachs pretty much control the Federal Reserve. But it gets more interesting when you actually dig down.
Well, those are the usual suspects. We could have guessed, but the blockbuster is what you're about to tell us,
Right.
which is really put it in perspective for us, because you can always answer the question of who owns anything nowadays by giving a glib answer. But you went to the other side of the screen, the other side of the curtain, and what did you find?
We pulled up the actual SEC filings for all of these banks, and we looked at who are the owners disclosed at the SEC that control those banks. And with very few exceptions, Vanguard, BlackRock, or Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan pretty much control everything. And by far and away, Vanguard is running the world. Vanguard is running the Federal Reserve almost exclusively, because in all those banks that we just named, Vanguard's got either the top holding or maybe the second holding. A couple of cases, the third top holding.
That is a big revelation, but you go even deeper than that. We'll go there in a second. But let me just summarize what you just said so nice and plainly. We always would say, of course, it's going to be Vanguard, and then it's going to be BlackRock, and then of course it's going to be State Street, and what is it, T. Rowe Price, and then it's going to be
Price is in there,
and then of course J.P. Morgan Bank. But you listed these banks, and you think, oh well, they're banks. Well, I mean, the banks, they're just out there in the what's it called, the free market, just doing good stuff. They're banks, right? No, wrong. They're owned by asset management companies, which basically, when you say asset management in today's economic age, you might as well say Satan himself, because nothing is worse than the fact that these people have assets. That's all they have. They can't lose, and they own everything. So when you look at Vanguard, this was the revelation to me from your research. The first big revelation was, holy moly, Vanguard controls BlackRock. Not only that,
Yep.
BlackRock controls the U.S. debt through the Treasury. And now that you've pointed out that Vanguard owns the major control of all of the people who own the Federal Reserve,
Correct.
then what we just got through and then I'm not gonna spoil it for them. You found out who's behind Vanguard, which I've always wondered. And didn't I just say to you some weeks ago, man, I wish I knew who I could blame over at Vanguard, and you found all that, but you found also who's really behind them. And that's the problem here. The people who own everything can't make mistakes, you see. Now, here's the problem for me is, if this is literally a foreign takeover of the Federal Reserve, and what do? They set our interest rates. They control our currency. They control everything. And their reports, which are half the time horrifying lies, manipulate the market. And they tell the U.S. Treasury what to do. Now, it looks like total sellout to the Fed with the Fed Online, which was a huge success, and then it became a failure when it turned into Fed Now in July. So we predicted it would fail, but what you've pointed out is ultimately why it failed, and I'll save that for later. So who is behind Vanguard?
Vanguard, that is another. If you're just looking at Vanguard straight up, you don't know any of the history. It's an odd situation where they don't actually disclose beneficial owners, and they say they sort of talk like they're this common fund where they have lots of members, and there's no individuals, and it's hard to get any kind of report out of them related to who actually holds the stock in Vanguard. And what is now evident is that the reason for that is the British package has all been hidden behind Vanguard, and that the City of London Rothschilds, the Bearing Bank, the Warburgs, the Schiffs, the Barclays Bank, they're all hiding behind their Vanguard holding because by law, they don't have to disclose who they are. And that is totally antithetical to everything that we have in our Securities and Exchange Commission requirements for a company. A company is duty bound to disclose to the public who their controlling shareholder interests are. And yet in Vanguard's case, they don't have to. Well, who made up that rule? All of a sudden, Vanguard can do something that no other stock company in the world can do, and that is just tell you, we're not going to tell you. And then we've got the similar behavior out of the Federal Reserve in that by policy, we're not going to tell you. And that's the lawlessness that we're dealing with. You're truly right. This is demonic. It's emerging out of the same Babylonian Radonite merchant banker mentality of exploitation of the human creativity, the human being, the creative capacity of a human being, and to suck every last ounce of value you can out of a human being before you knock them off.
So let me repeat. I hope you all just heard him say, I have been hoping this was true. I was begging. I was ready to just go ahead and say it because I figured it had to be true. That behind Vanguard, this asset management veil, which Michael has just explained,
Right.
they don't answer to anybody. Who's there? Rothschild, Coots, Baring, Barclays, the British Crown, and many others in the city of London. So, folks, our Federal Reserve is owned by the Brits. They control everything. Remember, it'd be to me the same exact question as you just asked. Who put them in charge? Well, who put the Rothschilds in charge of setting the gold and silver rates
I can tell you.
and the LIBOR percentage rates? Well, who sets our interest rates in America to control our economy? That would be Brits.
Let me answer that historically. Who put the Rothschilds in charge? Alexander Hamilton, in the formation of the first four banks in the United States. Now, he didn't even hide it back then. It was listed, or it was the Hope Bank in Amsterdam, which ties back to the Rothschilds anyway. So at that time, that was just well known that the Rothschilds were funding the wars on both sides. But since then, the propaganda being what it is, it's clear they made a decision at some point. We've got to, at least on paper, make these companies look like they're mostly American, and so that's what they've done. But what we see is these are multinational banking warlords that are taking their instructions from the City of London. New York is a side business.
I have to add something here. Since the very beginning, we said, and I'll show this to you, the Vanguard logo. What is that? That's a pirate ship. Yeah. Well, who are the pirates? The British Imperial Empire. You see, they used to just rape and destroy countries, with their pirate ships. And now they've got it all under lock and key in the banking system, and it's Vanguard. And as we were discussing this, when you were doing your research, we said, well, it has to be Vanguard that owns it all. You can't have it shared, BlackRock and Vanguard. And there's no way that King Charles is not going to own it all. And so right. When you look at Vanguard, what you're really looking at are all these interlocking directorships, shareholders, and they all roll up to a kind of like a golden share. And he is right. He has trillions at his disposal, and he is out to commit war and genocide on all humanity. And why in the heck is he coming to New York in September? Is he going to shake his big stick and tell the Pilgrim Society to get with it and this great reset isn't happening fast enough?
I'm sure he is.
And then I have another question. So if it's a corporation, all these things you listed, and they own the Federal Reserve is a corporation, the bank's all on it, then it just needs to go bankrupt. And I guess it just made trillions and trillions of bad loans. And the guy left holding the bag is King Charles. So he needs to open up his coffers and settle his debt with humanity.
Perfect. He's an animal. He's coming here to mark his territory. and his territory is the Federal Reserve, as you say. He owns it. He's just coming over here to demonstrate to everyone that he does and mark his territory. And essentially, yes, we are controlled by the British, because look at the banks. Even if you look at the names of those banks, as you said, Alexander Hamilton was a British spy, number 7, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And what some of the banks you mentioned to begin with that are the shield cover for the British ownership through asset management, particularly Vanguard and BlackRock, which is basically a subsidiary. It's controlled by Vanguard. Is really just those are shield companies. Now, how many of those original banks that you just read came from the 4 original banks that Alexander Hamilton helped create for British control over the U.S. economy from the get-go?
Well, we've got HSBC, obviously, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. They were quite involved in the opium trade and made their money basically using opium as financial credits. Then you've got Barclays. They go back a long way. And then, of course, hiding behind the curtains, as usual, is the Rothschilds. And I'm sure if we pulled the financials of each one of those companies, we'd see the Rothschilds buried in there somewhere.
And J.P. Morgan, and this.
JP. You might as well say Rothschild.
Yeah, these are the usual suspects.
JP took his instruction on how to do banking from the Rothschilds, literally.
Now, what I liked was in your presentation there, you also had coming kind of associated with the escutcheon of the British, a demon, because really this isn't, somebody could sit around and say, well, that person says that they're Ashkenazi Jew. That person says they're Hebrew. That person says they're Sephardic. That person says they're, none of that matters. We look at them as they are pagans doing the same thing the Babylonian Radnites have been doing for thousands of years. We could literally say 4 millennia.
Or at least, yeah.
And so it's the same old, same old. It's nothing new. And so what is our job? Our job is to look at the evil, make sure that we know what it is so it has no power over us, and then to disassociate from it. But until you know what it is, it has power over you. And so these very small handful of people in the city of London control our economic status. Look at Jerome Powell. Now, who in America could even explain what the U.S. Federal Reserve is? Very few. I'm going to explain it a little bit, and you're going to go, he's making that up. The president does get to point the head, but that isn't the head. The head is the head of the New York central banks. That's where all the big deals go down, to the 5 big brokerage houses for everything, controlling basically everything that uses U.S. currency, which is most of the world. So you got the head of the New York Central Bank is more powerful than Jerome Powell. They're not the ones who set it. The rest of the central bank heads rotate through this committee that controls everything for the Federal Reserve, and those are central banks. The Federal Reserve itself has the power to set interest rates, which supposedly should control all free markets. So why did we give a company that is a private corporation that has never been audited, that doesn't turn in any records of what they do? When they were asked one time, that jerk who was the head of the Fed was asked what happened to the $4.5 trillion. He says, I don't know. They were off-book accounting. $4.5 trillion. We the people owe that debt, but the head of the Fed can't tell you where the money went. This is what's going on here.
By the way, they do claim they're audited. If you look at their financial reports, the annual reports, they say they're audited financial reports, but in these very same documents, they don't disclose any of their shareholders. So it's not a very good audit.
It's such a terrible audit that we forget. People say, no, it's a government agency. No, it is not. The government agency votes on a regular basis. I forget, I think it's 4 years, through the House, and nobody ever talks about it, whether they should continue and whether the debt should continue. And we not only at that time continue ratifying the U.S. Federal Reserve continuing to have control, now really incredible control over our U.S. federal treasury, they at the same time submit a bill That bill is for what? They only have a few people working there, and the bill is usually between $4 and $5 billion every 4 years. So $1 billion a year we're paying the Fed to control our money, to allow us to print the money, to charge us interest rates on what is called onerous debt. We can never pay it back. It always gets bigger. So everything that is being paid to the Fed, people don't talk about any of the payments to the Fed now, do they ever? Where does that money go?
Those payments, the interesting thing about those payments is the dividends, for example, that they pay out to these, have a slightly different name, member stock. It's not quite shares, but it's close. But anyway, they disclose the amount. They just don't say who it's going to.
It's a private corporation.
It's such a charade. But Douglas, they got a 242-page annual report. By the time you hire the accountants and the attorneys to make up all these lies, it's expensive. You got to realize that.
Well, but you see, all the money that we get from our gross domestic product, after 65% is stolen by offshore accounts, usually through stock market exchange and commodity exchange deals, through hedge funds, which don't pay taxes. So once you calculate our gross domestic product, it isn't enough to pay the yearly debt that we owe the Fed. Now, ask anybody, why do we owe the Fed anything? They won't be able to answer you. Here's the answer: war debt. We were all ascribed war debt when Social Security was created, when the Internal Revenue Service was created, when taxes in America in that way were created. It was war debt, and that debt has been accumulating, and it's hypothecated to every American at the moment that you get your Social Security card. So basically, you are nothing more than a walking debt to the Fed. That's how pathetic it is, and hardly 10 people can explain that to you. And why does the Fed have the ability now, through Fed Online, to do what the U.S. Treasury used to do? In the beginning, clearances for checks in America went through the U.S. Treasury. They don't anymore. They go to all these other places. Only a little bit, usually the foreign stuff goes through the U.S. Treasury. Now, it goes through all these other different companies, private corporations, to make money off of that exchange. Well, the Fed is getting involved, and it's called Fed Online. It's already been working now. 10,000 of the largest companies are all connected to the Fed, so they control that.
When you say Fed, what we've just discovered, you need to say City of London.
Yes, exactly.
Stop saying the Fed.
Yeah,
we don't run this. The City of London runs this.
Yes, and I'd say Crown agents, but it's above the Crown. The Crown is one of the people in the City of London.
There's some of the shock troops for these people.
Exactly. That's why he's coming. He's coming to show us that he's the big swinging, that he's the he's the guy, and that he's the richest man in the world. Because why? His mama was the richest person in the world. And the amounts that people guess that they have are probably much more real compared to them saying they only have $800 million in their assets. Complete and absolute nonsense. He's a maniac. And what he's coming to do, I will tell you, is what Biden, the idiot, whoever the stand-in for Biden is now, who always tells you what he's not supposed to say. They say, whatever you do, Joe, don't say this when you go out there. What does he do? He goes out and he says it. Like in Hawaii, he said, well, what we have here is incredible devastation, except for the trees that seem to have not burnt, though they were next to the buildings that burn up. See, that's Joe. Wow. So what is Charles III going to say? All the wrong things, which he always has. And so by the time he's done being the idiot on display, because he is the town idiot, the city of London, he's a city idiot. That's not easy to say. He's the city idiot of city of London, and he's going to come over here and he's going to reveal that he wants to take over the world now because he's really old and he doesn't have much time to be the dictator of his hegemony, which is always the plan. And what's the number one thing in his plan? Always depopulation. So guaranteed he's going to be screaming about climate control, because climate control is another word for depopulation.
So with this information, I mean, I think a lot of people suspected this. Now we can see that it's proved, and we can see why they're hiding who their shareholders are, because if you, all you got to do is look, and you start to realize that this all rolls up to the interlocking relationships that are now Vanguard. Now it's taken many years for us to understand these interlocking relationships, but there's always somebody feeding somebody else. And now we've found the top of the food chain related to the banking, and that is Vanguard. But then Vanguard then rolls up to the City of London. So here we have the Pilgrim Society again running things. And it's interesting, as we've been saying that over the years now, people are we're starting to hear the word Pilgrim Society trickle into other people's conversations. But it's interesting to watch those that have had another story for how this got here, with the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Council on Foreign Relations, or whatever. Those are all parts of it. But it's interesting how people will introduce the idea of the Pilgrim Society because they don't know anything about it. They back off to keep telling their old stories. So I think we're making progress anyway.
Without a doubt. And it's important to remember, and some people are waking up to just simply the fact that they read Wikipedia and they noticed that usury and the bad banking practices of extreme interest rates, which put people in jail, debtor's prison, started in Babylon. But who was it that started it? It wasn't just the Babylonians. It was the most ruthless, cutthroat merchants of the time who became the bankers, the tax collectors. They became the people who managed the government, and they controlled sections of the Silk Road, which was basically all commerce and merchandising at that time between countries or nations, whatever you'd call them, went through the Silk Road. And so that became what we make sure people understand, is not confused with somebody saying they're a Jew. So as I was saying before, I just saw yesterday a list of all the people involved with the pandemic who are Jewish. I don't care about that. I care about the fact that they're ruthless pagans.
Right.
I care about the fact that no Christian could do what they did. I care about the fact that they're ruthless murderers. I care about the fact that their usury isn't just interest rates. It's unreasonable interest rates that they know pretty much is going to drive the person into bankruptcy, and then throw them in jail and seize their property.
You know, one of the things about there seems to be a penchant to want to summarize all the problems around one particular ethnic group. And I was never raised that way. I was always raised to, if you see a problem, the first time you are a victim of the problem, shame on that person. But if you see a problem and you don't fix it, then the next time you're a victim of it, it's shame on me. And so even if a person wants to summarize all the bad guys in the world as Jewish, A, it's incorrect. But B, even if you do, hey, guy, fix it, and then stop and so take some responsibility for this information that you're putting out. And at that point, I think, to your point, we start looking at this from a human viewpoint and not labels. And I think that's where we have to go with this information. And as we have discovered, that even if you talk genetics, you're not talking Hebrew. You're talking Sogdian, Persian, Turkish. You're talking the Babylonian Radonites, which are a proven entity, even though history has tried to write them out, especially after 1066 when England was formed. That didn't happen. And here we are 1,000 years later, finally, 1,000 years later, recognizing that history that was rewritten was to hide these bankers. And that, I mean, think of the power that these ancient Babylonian bankers had. And you have to ask, do you think they ever gave it up? And the answer is clearly no, they never gave it up. They just changed their form, changed their look, put on different clothes, dragged that Solomon's gold all over Europe, and then finally ended up with it in the City of London. That gold was quite useful to them.
Absolutely. Babylonian gold. It's like the same old story. The Whore of Babylon is described in the Apocalypse. And what you're talking about here is that really, it isn't the haplogroup of the supposed Hebrews because, sorry, there is no such thing. The other day, they just tested a lizard and sent it into one of those DNA places, and it came out 51%
I know.
Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazi's not a thing. It's not an ethnic group.
It's ridiculous. How could it possibly when there is no such thing? So the myths around some of this is utterly
No, it
ridiculous.
proves that what we all thought, they're all lizards. They're all reptiles, and their blood type comes back to a lizard. And the other thing is look, I don't know how much more clearer we have to make this. We did not win the American Revolutionary War, and people all throughout history have stood up to this and have made proclamations even in Congress. Let's take Lillian Scott Troy. And who was the congressman? I can't think of his name now, that also put things into the congressional record.
Thorkelson.
Yes, Thorkelson. And so over time, great Americans have put this in the record. And of course, it's never looked at by the media because the media is controlled by the British Pilgrim Society. Okay, it all rolls up to King Charles. He thinks he's king of the world. And it's time that we Americans wake up and throw off the Brits.
Amen.
When a vampire looks in the mirror, you don't see anything. When Charles looks in the mirror, he thinks he's king and he doesn't see, we don't see him. We don't see the Brits because they're vampires. And we're looking in a mirror because they tell us we're still basically just their colonies. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, as much information as there is now to prove what we're saying, you can't get people to even mouth the word Pilgrim Society. Now, I remember it took us a while. It took me a while.
And it shakes people up to find the truth.
You got that doctor, my audience knows who's this.
Yuval Harari.
No, the one, the COVID thing. It's Lee Merritt on there on InfoWars, and then she's on another channel talking about the Babylonians. She's a friggin' idiot that she can't research enough to find out what she's talking about. She's going to get herself in trouble like Sidney Powell did when Sidney said the words Mark Malloch Brown and election rigging together, because Lee Merritt is not looking closely at the research, or she's trying to distract you from the research that's been done. She calls them the Babylonians, the Anunnaki. Oh, please give me a break, woman. Get your head on and tell people who they are.
Lordy,
now that's my opinion. I'm not spreading it onto you. How about her gal pals from Sasha Stone's network? Haven't they called her up and said, hey, you're close, but you need to go deeper. We met some guys at this conference, Mike McKibben and Doug Gabriel. They told us all about the Babylonian Radonites. Have they called Lee to correct her?
Yeah, it's hard.
She's just parroting.
Parroting. She has an audience and she's misinforming them. Is it on purpose, or is it because of her sloppy research?
Sloppy research.
Then why should I believe her on anything? And then let me add, this is me. She's a former Navy. Who runs the Navy? Serco. What is Serco? Serco's British. I don't trust her.
Didn't they just take down the show that we watched with the gentleman?
Well, no, I don't know which one. Somebody said that her videos were taken down, but I haven't verified that yet.
Because she's the fourth hour of Alex Jones sometimes, since this was an interview. And the guy that was talking, and then he started talking about the Anunnaki being aliens coming down to harvest the gold from the earth. These kind of things are so silly because it shows the lack of depth in scholarship and the fact that people are so anxious to believe anything that they'll listen to someone like that. But let's go back to Yuval Harari, the World Economic Forum guy. He says that we can now be hacked and programmed. That is true, and it's much truer than anyone wants to admit, and I've oftentimes talked about this. But what we're talking about with a true Radonite Babylonian bankster, these are people who are ruthless murderers. They don't mind starting wars. That's one of the best ways for them to make money. They don't mind putting the chip in your brain so that you don't even have to go on the internet. You can be exposed to what they want you to know through the chip in your brain. Yes, that's why, because something's missing. And here's what even Radonite Babylonians are missing: humanity. If you're going to charge interest rates that you know are going to drive someone into bankruptcy, you've given up your humanity. That is what's going on. What's our debt right now to the Federal Reserve? It can never be paid back. What is it, 30 trillion, 32 trillion? That's nothing. There's off-book accounting that we don't know what it is. And until they turn in the bill, We don't know what it is. They give us a bill and we pay the bill and they tell us what to do and they control our economy. Now we find out that Vanguard, which basically the grassroots has awakened to the answer. The answer is, who is the evil in the world? Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. Who is that? That is the Rothschilds, the Barings, the Coots, the Barclays. It's the people in the city of London who have already planned this all out. Lynn Scott Troy, as Tyler told us all about their plan, and their plan is really being quite effective. Why? Except they didn't go over to FedNow. And please, we should give a round of applause to Aim for Truth, because we said it would not, it would fail. Why did it fail? Because when they started Fed Online, it demanded ESG compliance. Where did ESG compliance go? I think it went down the toilet with some Bud Light beer, if I'm not mistaken. And then down the Target got moved. And then Walmart, poor old Sam Walton, got affected. And why? Because ESG isn't going to be stuffed down our throat as the basis for climate control, which is nothing more than a new form of currency. And who controls the currency and its rates and its movement and its exchange? That's the U.S. Federal Reserve in America. So this is nothing more than the British again, just like with John Maynard Keynes trying to start the Banco, one world coin. That's what they want now. It's going to be a digital coin, but who's putting forth this in all the other countries right now? The central bank, what they call the national central bank. We call it the U.S. Federal Reserve. It's not national. It's not central. As you pointed out, it has no reserves. It's not a bank.
Reading about the Fed today, that there was a lot of discussion, the fact that we haven't fused with the Bank for International Settlements yet. So that's another element of this that they want to enmesh in the Fed. But I was surprised to see even we've let the People's Republic of China invest in the Fed. I mean, that's just disgusting.
Well, Mitch McConnell's wife needed to get a piece of the pie. I don't know why you get upset by this. I mean, at least the Clintons didn't get the ruling shares.
It shouldn't be too disgusting, because what we can see is that the U.S. banks have never been in our control. So why should we worry that they're not right now?
And our country has never been under the Constitution in our lifetimes, or parents' or grandparents' lifetime. Right. And it's time. And when people say, well, we need to call a convention together and we'll redo a constitution. No, we need to get the Constitution and follow it. It was a contract between we, the people, and the government. We, the people, are the ones in charge. And we issued this for the government to do things, but not to harm us. And they're out genociding us. It's everywhere. And it's not just in our country. It's all over the world. King Charles has an agenda. It's the Great Reset. And you aren't a part of it in his mind, because you're going to be killed off before we get there.
Well, the time will tell whether the checks and balances that the founders put into the Constitution will actually work. We don't know that yet.
No, they won't. The judicial has totally been taken over. Tell me about the patent office and your trials with the judicial system. We have been in the swamp for 10 years uncovering everything. Has anybody gone to jail? Has Bill Barr been executed for treason?
They haven't even brought it up.
They haven't even done it. Okay, so that's Congress. Congress is just filled with crown agents doing the will of the monarchy. And then what's left? Well, not as a part of the branches of government, but you have the bureaucracy full of crown agents, senior executive services. There is no one at the helm.
Right.
Prince Charles is a big supporter of the World Economic Forum, and they declared this was the year of the reset. So Charles is over here trying to kick us into gear because FedNow didn't go into place. And so he's pissed. He's coming over to kick ass because he's a nutcase. And he always gets in deeper than he can get out of because he's a very small-minded person.
He said it's needed to be on a warlike footing. That's what he said. And probably we aren't as warlike as he wants us to be. So he's over here to rally his Pilgrim Society and senior executive services operatives to get with the program. And isn't it interesting? It's about the time that they say the new COVID lockdowns are going to come, the climate lockdowns and the mask and everything.
Well, the UN controls America through the World Health Organization. In toto, we saw
There's
that in the
bat phone.
pandemic.
They're constantly
So-
calling Mike for help in Gotham
I
City.
know. Tell the White House to call back later. You're not going to be the vice president.
Yeah, like Biden
Trump.
has speed dial to Mike McKibben.
He
That's
does.
funny.
Well, Hunter does, because Hunter needs some legal advice. So anyway, so I think that's right. What we really have here is the revelation of what we all have dreaded and known, and we have been preaching for years, and that's that sorry, America doesn't exist. We are nothing more than a colony of Britain, and basically nothing more than a suburban bedroom to the city of London. We just do what they tell us to do,
A
and we
cleverly
cease it.
organized colony.
Yes. And so we are, what is it? We are the 55th member of the United Kingdom, because if our economy is controlled by the city of London, well, then what is that? We're economic slaves, and there's nothing we can do. Look at the way that Jerome Powell keeps raising interest rates. What is that? That's economic insanity. And then they lie about the results so that then they can control the markets and tell you that there's unemployment is this, and there's the consumer. I love it. Consumer confidence. They give us all the time. They tell us what our confidence is. In other words, we don't get to demonstrate our confidence.
Isn't that interesting how instead of human beings, we are consumers? That's a good banker, merchant banker. It's all about consumption.
That's it. Absolutely. So basically, thank you so much for revealing to us once again the realities and the truths that have been going on for a long, long time that so many people are not willing to look at. Thank you for opening another chapter of Truth History.
You are welcome.